You must tell me everything about your vault. I will conquer it and turn all those pure strain
humans
into mutants. They will give me the army I need to bring
peace to the entire wasteland.
Fellas, I am shocked. Shocked and appalled that it has taken me this long to tackle a villain from any of the Fallout games, and for that, I sincerely apologize. Because Fallout has long been a series that expertly studies the human condition and experience post-nuclear disaster. This is done through humor, horror, but just generally really strong writing and characters. But these games have never ever shied away from all of the potential evil and interesting shades of it that would inevitably spring up from the ashes of the old world. I mean, this setting, man, has gotta be a villain's paradise, a post-apocalyptic hellscape of desolation and desperation, just asking to be used and/or abused. But for today's video, we need to turn back the clocks to 1997 with the first ever game in this series. Because to this day, and look me in the eyes when I tell you this, the original Fallout bad guy, the OG, is quite frankly in a league of his own. I would go so far as to call him nearly perfect. A horrifying mass of flesh and machine, a mutated amalgam of consciousness that has created a cult of followers, an army of mutants, and an impressive plan to see his vision for the wasteland completed. A menacing, intelligent, and extremely prepared puppet master that has philosophies that, quite honestly, make some pretty good sense. His goal is very simple: to unite all of humanity in this new radiated world under one race. Mutants. You heard me right. In a war-torn, chaotic wasteland, the Master legitimately wants unity and ultimately peace. But what path is he willing to take to achieve those things? That is another story entirely. Because he is snarky, he's scary, he's nuanced, he's kinda gross. He, to me, is the quintessential Fallout villain. So then, how does he hope to achieve his goal? Who was he before he was this thing? How can you, the Vault Dweller, stop him? And what is the Master even the master of? Well, before we dive into the backstory of this character, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of my beautiful patrons over on Patreon who help keep this channel going. I appreciate you all very deeply. I am Ghost, your host as always, and if you like video game lore, character analysis, game reviews, and other stuff like that, you have found yourself in the right place, my friend. So without further ado, let us begin at the very beginning. Any villain in any creative medium worth their salt has to have a convincing platform, and that platform is often built through a compelling backstory. You know, the events that warped or changed this character into a monster worthy of our opposition. So the Master we see in-game is only ever this kind of horrifying contraption, eyes coming out of his neck and shit. I mean, what a mess. But his backstory begins far from any ideals surrounding mutant supremacy, because the Master began his life as a man named Richard Moreau, born before even the Great Wars and growing up inside Vault 8. Richard very likely had a life better than many who found themselves in crappier vaults, or those getting their ass straight beat out in the wasteland. And while his early life is shrouded in a ton of mystery, what we do know for certain is that he at one point as a young man was exiled from his vault, being charged with murder. Well, was he guilty? Was he innocent? Who knows for sure? I certainly have no clue. But he now had to make a decision, to find a new life or wither away in the wasteland. So with little to lose, he headed south and found himself eventually in the Hub, a township and trading center that the survivors in the wasteland relied on heavily for commerce and community. And it was there that Moreau reinvented himself. He was now Richard Gray, a quick-witted doctor, scientist, and philosopher. He spent his days here studying and pondering the radiated California wastes. As you can probably imagine, this is a decent time in history to be a doctor, as the fallout from the nuclear wars of the past had continued to alter and warp the very landscape, people, and wildlife of California and beyond. So there was plenty for Richard to study and treat. But here in this new life, he was fitting in pretty well. People liked him, and he made friends with another awesome Fallout character of legend known as Harold. Harold is honestly kind of like Forrest Gump. You know, he's been around forever and seen tons of shit out in the wasteland. And at this point in time, Harold lived and worked as a caravan master and trader. Well, old Harold had begun to notice a pretty serious problem in the surrounding area of California. A constant stream of reports of seemingly mutated and enraged wildlife attacking caravans, traders, and settlements. So he put together a little crew of folks and decided to bring along our friend Richard Gray to act as team doctor, and also to study and document the entire expedition, hoping to learn more about this mutation, the issue with the animals, and bring the whole thing to an end. Eventually, this investigation led the group to an old pre-war facility known as the Mariposa Military Base. Now, let's pause the backstory for 1 second and remember that Fallout 1 takes place in the year 2161, and this backstory a couple decades before that. But way back before all of this, in 2077, before the nukes even dropped, this facility here served a very sinister purpose. You see, the pre-war world in America was one of ruthless innovation at all costs. And here at Mariposa, they had been developing a little thing known as FEV, or Forced Evolutionary Virus. Now, what began as a little tool to counteract biological warfare had turned into a bit of a darker experiment. I'm talking animal subjects being fed this nasty compound that caused extreme cell growth and mutation to the point of having extra limbs and becoming extremely aggressive. Many of these animal subjects eventually killed each other or just died. Of course though, because humans are terrible, they turned around with this result and immediately began testing the compound on their fellow humans. These tests also had mixed results, with many people dying, and eventually the base was sealed off when the bombs began to fall. So, a pretty dark and odd past here at Mariposa. And over the decades post-war, that base had begun to fall into disrepair, wildlife had found its way in, become infected with that FEV stuff, and were causing all these issues for Harold, Richard, and other caravans. So, as Richard and his group got closer to the base, the amount of mutants surrounding this facility became staggering. Fighting through the herd was costly, and eventually it was only Harold and Richard that made it into the inner chambers of Mariposa, where they were able to locate the source of the mutations. Huge open vats of glowing green FEV. And just when they were plotting how to seal or destroy the stuff, a robotic crane arm swoops down and slaps our boy Richard right into the goop, with Harold being knocked out cold and badly injured. Now, when I think about this while making the video, it's almost like a golden age of comics kind of backstory, right? A big radioactive glowing barrel for like a meek little doctor to be pushed into and turned into a supervillain. It's just so classic and so predictable. So what followed for Richard here was pure insanity. In the game, the player can find like a little diary describing the moments after falling in and the changes that began to occur as a result of coming in contact with the FEV. But the only immediate major issue for Richard was nearly drowning in this stuff. I mean, it looks viscous, right? Who knows what the consistency really is, but I imagine it's like glowing green, warm Nutella. Really hard to move through. Oh, and it's rearranging your DNA the entire time, so that can't be pleasant. But it was really in the hours that followed getting out that Richard, now alone in this place, with Harold having escaped, began to experience excruciating pain. His skin was bubbling, burning, peeling, cracking, nearly falling off of his bones. His mind too began to run in circles. He lost track of time, a sense of self, and became consumed by that physical pain and hallucinations. Somehow he was able to drag himself to the control room and waited for what felt like an eternity for his inevitable death, the end of his suffering. No one can say how long he waited. Maybe it was hours, days, or weeks, but death never came. As the pain fluctuated and he shifted in and out of consciousness, he began to notice his body changing, morphing, and becoming stronger again. Slowly, he retaught himself to walk, but things felt different and odd. Without any control over his own actions, he at one point watched a tendril spring from his stomach and snatch up a nearby rat passing by on the ground. He instantly absorbed this creature into his belly and felt the presence of its rodent mind join with his, I mean, holy smokes, the lines between dream and reality were completely blurred. He was in an absolute daze, but as he mutated further, his mind began to sharpen. He found himself pondering huge philosophical questions about the meaning of life and what the future of the wasteland would hold for him and all of humanity. All of a sudden, he was coming to obvious conclusions on these topics with ease. Whew, alright, now let's pause for a minute here, because we have seen many villains in video games, movies, books, etc. spiral into evil due to some sort of process like this. I mean, I don't necessarily mean radiation or mutation, but just a disconnecting from reality in some way. You know, a new realm of thought being introduced to them that allows them to see with maybe a false sense of clarity. Or hey, maybe a true clarity, who am I to say? And I just really think it's a compelling type of character and villain, because their reality, this new reality, becomes so much the truth to them that they see themselves legitimately as a hero, a visionary, a prophet, the only one alive who has awoken to said truth. It's also a perfect setup for a character becoming a cult leader of some sort, which the Master eventually is, but more on that later. So as Richard continued to change, he began to wonder about that rat that he initially consumed. What if he was to dunk a similar rat into the FEV just as he had been? Could a simple little minded creature also expand his consciousness and reach a higher plane of understanding than his kin? It was time to experiment, and Richard did all sorts of experiments. He threw animals in there of all different types, and at one point threw a dog and a rat into the FEV together. The result of this experiment blew Richard's mind. The two had fused together but remained separate, a peaceful union that really inspired something within Richard.
Perfection.
What if all of the wasteland resembled this sort of unity? If all could be as he is now, evolved, ascended, introspective, this right here is the seed of his eventual goal. So, with expanded mental capacities, a sense of self-important delusion, and a growing agenda for the large-scale changes he had in mind for the wasteland, we have all the makings, my friends, of a fantastic villain taking his first steps. But frustratingly, Richard was still ignorant of what the FEV really was, who made it, what is its full capability. And add to it that he was completely by himself. There were no visitors or test subjects around besides the occasional rat. So what else to do than begin experimenting more on himself? He continually injected his body with FEV in intervals and began to monitor the changes physically and mentally. Eventually, this allowed him to take another huge step in his personal evolution, as his biology and awareness had reached levels that allowed his organic form to fuse with that of the mainframe computer of the Mariposa military facility. And at that moment, his knowledge expanded tenfold. He instantly gained every piece of information on the development of the FEV, the history of the substance, the base, and all that it was apparently capable of. But he still longed to test this newfound knowledge on other humans, and that was very, very difficult for him to do. But after patiently waiting, several explorers found themselves unfortunate enough to wander into his base. Now, with his kind of omnipresent control over the facility now, he was able to trap and experiment on all of the poor bastards who walked through his doors. But things never quite went the way that he planned. None of them transformed the way that he had. When dunked in the juice, they often turned into big, hulking mutant idiots that were too dumb to even walk, or they just died and outright fell into literal pieces. However, instead of letting these failures walk away or serve him in any way, Richard consumed them just like he had consumed the rat, to constantly be growing his consciousness. And this is something that he continued to do into the future. Feed. So through further research, Richard figured out that the common denominator with all of his failures was humans with a high amount of existing radiation damage. But even more important than that, and this is the biggest key here, is that he discovered the presence of a radiated variant of FEV in the environment. So it turns out that a bomb had hit the original West Tech facility where the forced evolutionary virus was originally created. This sent particles of FEV up into the atmosphere to fall back down to a radiated Earth. So without any of them even knowing it, tons of people in the wasteland had been infected with this radiated FEV, which for whatever reason screwed up Richard's little plans to turn people into higher beings like himself. Now remember that Richard grew up in a vault, so he was completely pure in this regard, never exposed to that kind of radiation or radiated FEV. So he decided he needed more pure test subjects, those who hadn't spent a life in the wasteland. This was the true test of his patience. But at some point, after tons of waiting, he had his wish. He successfully trapped a more pure human and converted that person into the first ever super mutant with a mind and consciousness much closer to his own. This is a humongous breakthrough for Richard, so what did he do with his prized super? Keep growing that consciousness, baby. But I think this is where we can officially say Richard Grey became the Master. He is now part computer, part super mutant, part Richard, part rat, part whatever else he has been eating. I mean, he is an absolute pile of goop.
Look at that thing.
So what followed this big breakthrough was a 30-year period of slow and steady progress. The Master was deciding to play the long game, amassing more perfect super mutants and hammering out the kinks of his FEV so that his creations could still do things like reproduce, but he struggled and struggled to get it just right. So we've mentioned a few times now that the Master wanted to bring peace to the wasteland, and as tough as it is to believe, that is certainly true, because he ultimately saw the diversity of life, ghouls, normal humans, the powerful, the powerless, all of these disparities, leading to a species that would eternally be warring and conflicting with each other. Creating a mutated and unified race was always the vision. Also, his super mutants would legitimately be better. I mean, immune to radiation, disease, illness, a lot of aging, truly the next step in human evolution. And during those 30 years, the Master needed a sidekick, so he crafted a nearly perfect super mutant, the best work yet, to be his right-hand man.
To save the world, we will convert all the worthy individuals. Simple, efficient, glorious.
This guy is known as the Lieutenant. I mean, he was smarter, stronger, and faster than probably any human in existence, and the two together began devising various plans, ways of finding and capturing more normals, or humans primed for a little conversion. But if you ask me, this plan is still sounding a little doo-doo, right? It's a little scary. I mean, big muscle-headed motherfuckers running around stealing people. It's not the best game plan if your organization is called Unity and you want to achieve peace. I mean, the only humans that you're going to get will be kicking and screaming, and before long, you might have an entire army of people on your doorstep that, hey, don't want to be super mutants. But the Master, pretty smart guy, and he knew all of this. He had planned long ago to smooth out his public image before making any big moves here. But first, he needed a publicist, and a damned good one. So enters another character named Morpheus.
We are the messengers of evolution, my child. We follow the Master in his endless quest to heal the land and the people.
A human who was captured by Unity but was very interested in serving the Master in another capacity. So it was Morpheus who would end up heading the cult known as the Children of the Cathedral, a religious body infused with the Master's teachings, but one that only ever presented human faces to the public. And it was successfully seen for years as a decent group of weird-ass dudes who wanted to help people, establishing hospitals and bringing supplies to those in need, while also recruiting people into their ranks, mostly the downtrodden. So the doctrines of this cult are as follows. Number 1. The nukes that destroyed the old world were sacred, known as the Holy Flame, and they'd cleanse the world of evil and decadence. Number 2. Humans suck ass, and as long as there is a disparity amongst them, they will always fight and kill each other. And then 3. The final evolution of this cleansing of the world via the Holy Flame must come from accepting the Dark God, or the Master, by following his light and guidance, as we as a species may be fully reborn together as one people.
Join the children today.
So it sounds, Pretty bad, but pretty culty. But the Master, I think overall, did a wonderful job of diversifying his portfolio, creating a nice little con man front of a religion to make his crazy-ass scheme sound enticing and bring in those lower-end humans to serve him. This step in the plan also included relocating his gooey ass to the recently discovered Los Angeles Vault, an old but still operational facility where the church of his cult would reside right above. Now, this is a good move, all operations safely taking place in one place in a more central place. But holy shit, did the Master ever hit the jackpot in his new crib, because he found that he had acquired access to a map of all the locations of vaults in the surrounding areas and beyond. I mean, think about what this means. Literally barrels of sweet-ass humans that had little to no radiation or exposures. Oh baby. He and the lieutenant probably salivated at the thought. I mean, they could just end up sending groups of huge scary mutants to raid these places, bring back people, and quadruple their numbers overnight. God damn. Easy peasy, baby. Meanwhile, the lieutenant was left back at Mariposa to oversee the capture and conversion of more humans to continuously add to the ranks. Man, I mean, we gotta give full credit to the Master here. This is a very, very impressive operation, and the plan is fully in motion, puppeteering his way to California mutant domination. I just want to say that his backstory overall is like perfect. It isn't too dramatic or overly emotional, the motives here, nor are they the calculations of a non-caring kind of computer-like villain, but sort of a perfect blend of both. I mean, in a game that takes place in a barbaric, post-apocalyptic far future, it's just incredible to me how well they crafted a villain specifically for that setting. Another cool-ass thing about him that I forgot to mention is how the FEV gave him crazy-ass psionic and charismatic skills. When members of the cult came to visit him, they had to wear brain protectors so they wouldn't have their minds melted by looking at him and being in his presence. I mean, this guy has successfully achieved a futuristic god-like status. It's really incredible. So, who are you, the player, and what are you gonna do about it? Well, here in Fallout, the player character is simply known as the Vault Dweller, and you begin your journey in the safety of your little Vault 13 home, when all of a sudden, your Vault's water chip needs replacing. This is a pretty serious big deal, and you are the unlucky one chosen to go out, brave the wasteland in search of a new chip. Sounds pretty simple. So off you go on your adventure, with 150 in-game days to complete this task. But what begins as a simple run to the hardware store becomes something much, much more. You see, there are serious threats out in the wasteland that you discover, stuff that your family and friends back home are simply not prepared for. And eventually, while looking for the water chip, you will find a place known as Necropolis, a town with a population made up totally of ghouls, extremely radiated and fucked up humans that look really cool. This used to be the city of Bakersfield, California, and honestly, it seems like not that much has changed. But deep under Necropolis lies Vault 12. Here you are able to extract the water chip, and bada bing, problem solved, game's over. Who's the Master? What's that? I'm going home, I'm done, baby.
Are you sure about that?
You see, you do get to go home, but while you were out on this quest, you noticed super mutants everywhere. Especially in Necropolis, where they are essentially occupying the entire city. Additionally, if you are a completionist type player, you would have poked around and heard even more rumblings about something big occurring out here in the wasteland. And Vault 13 ended up being very lucky they sent you out here to deal with the water chip. Because when you finally get home, you of course report back to your overseer about all the stuff that you saw.
I am a little concerned, however. I don't like your reports. What was in the reports, that is. In fact, they scared the heck out of me. It's those mutants.
And he finds this super mutant thing to be very, very disturbing news. As he says, this cannot be natural. All of these new hostile giant mutants showing up, there has to be something or someone behind it. And if it poses any sort of threat to the Vault, your quest must continue. So you are tasked with finding the source of these mutants to ensure that it is nothing serious, and if it is, to deal with it. And at this point, like we have said, the Master is fully in his seat of power. The cult is bringing in humans daily, super mutants are likely raiding other vaults and capturing subjects as well, so you have a very, very tough task ahead. Now, one thing I would like to mention here is that originally in the 1.0 build of Fallout 1, the main questline here of taking down the Master and stopping Unity had the very same time limit system as the water chip thing. 500 days that you would be given to end the threat. If you failed, a cutscene would be shown to the player that, well, you lost. The Master won, raided your vault, and it's all over for you now. Additionally, with those original 150 days to get the water chip, you have the option to prolong that time frame by telling water traders in the hub to go deliver some H2O back home. However, if you do that, the time limit to kill the Master would be shortened down to 400 days because, well, you disclosed the location of your vault to many people and information spreads fast. And I just think that this original design was fucking awesome. It was changed with versions 1.1 and 1.2 of the game that were distributed to have like years to defeat the Master. But this original vision of it, man, being able to fail outright and have the Master win if you're too slow, not only is it really cool game design, but it empowers the villain narratively into an actual threat to your completion of the game. He's not just a static, I'll be waiting here when you want to get to the end credits type of presence, but like an actual bad guy actively trying to win. I think that is so cool, man. The player has two main objectives here at the end of the game: to find and destroy the Mariposa facility and source of the FEV and conversions, as well as locate the Master to topple the brains of the operation and bring an end to the threat of Unity. You have to do both of these things, but the order does not matter, which I think gives a nice amount of freedom here in the second half of the game that is well earned. Well, the only thing we have to go on is to find the lab. There are several ways to find it via the Brotherhood of Steel, some computer logs, or you can even ask old dusty-ass Harold himself. But that super mutant lab is, of course, Mariposa, and there you find the first bits of information about the Master, like that diary we talked about in the beginning of the video. And slowly, things begin to come a little bit more into focus, because here is where you get to meet the Lieutenant. Remember that really smart right-hand man of the Master? And he is kind enough to tell us pretty much everything about Unity, the FEV, the issues with it, conversion, and many other topics.
Before the war, the human scientists made a drug called FEV. It was designed to make the perfect human.
He has such a sharp wit, great voice acting, and a pretentious air about him. He legitimately doesn't see telling you all this shit as a risk because he assumes he's gonna beat your ass and you'll be a super mutant in a matter of moments. But of course, you're the hero, baby, and you kill his ass. And now finally, it is time to destroy the lab and track down the big man himself. The last thing on your checklist is to infiltrate the cult. And man, it is a long road getting here. Working with various factions like the Followers of the Apocalypse and the Brotherhood of Steel, fighting through dangerous areas full of super mutants, deathclaws, looters, and other monstrosities. I mean, Fallout 1 is a tough game that really makes you work for it. So it really does feel amazing to finally reach the summit here at the very end and defeat the ultimate enemy. And after donning a purple robe bedsheet thing, you can make your way through the cathedral, past some guards, and at last, into the Los Angeles vault. So we now have covered the backstory of this villain, the path the hero must take to confront him, and the overall plan of Unity and the Master. But how does this all really go down? You know, why does the Master ultimately fail? Fallout 1 is an RPG in the truest sense. Depending on your build, your skills, and preference, there are several ways to proceed here and end the game. First off, and most boring, is just to walk into the room and attack him the moment you arrive without even saying anything. You will rob yourself of one of the most memorable interactions in video game history and have a rather tough fight ahead. This is followed by the Master activating like a nuke failsafe as a last-ditch effort to leave his mark on California. The next option requires stealth skills. You can sabotage the Master by activating said nuke, sneaking out, bada bing, problem solved, although also, this is lame as hell, man. I don't recommend. The best and only way to deal with the Master is of course with the power of diplomacy and speech. And man, getting able to finally talk to this guy after all that you have seen and heard is a haunting haunting experience.
The Unity will bring about the master race.
Master.
One able to survive, or even
Thrive.
in the wasteland. As long as there are differences, we will
Tear ourselves apart!
fighting each other. We need one race,
Race.
one goal,
Goal.
one people to move forward to our destiny. Of course.
Mutants are best equipped to deal with the world today.
Who else?
The ghouls?
Please.
Normals?
They brought nuclear death to us all. This will be the age of mutants. All that.
Resist?
Yes. And all those that are required for the
Unity.
as well. The remainder will be allowed to live out their days, but under Unity
Control.
And protection.
He feels immensely powerful and influential. He has now fully integrated his organic matter with the entire vault. Tendrils, masses of flesh finding their way into every nook and cranny of the whole shebang. I mean, it's gross, but very impressive. Also, his voice is just something else. You can hear a man, woman, computer, and then slightly angrier man all sharing the very same mind and mouth. It's, yeah, this guy's gotta go, man. But this entire interaction is simply incredible. Again, he is somewhat convincing. A true charismatic villain, I think, should always be given a final say. A chance to convince us that what he or she is doing is in fact best for the world and best for us. And this game is even generous enough to give you one last chance to reconsider. You can, if you wish, join the Master's cause right here and now. If you find what he's saying to be truly compelling, hell, go ahead, become a super mutant and lose the game. That is absolutely your right. But no, come on, man. He's wrong. Unity and peace aren't good things, okay? Come on. So what then can we possibly tell him, an all-knowing supercomputer genius mutant man, if we want to win? Well. A large part of the Master's plan from the beginning relied on his new and improved FEV2 allowing the super mutants to reproduce. I mean, a new unified race wouldn't be much if they couldn't make babies, right? No villain wants to rule the world for like 7 years and then retire. Now, historically, FEV caused complete sterilization, but the Master believed that through his extensive experimentation and research, he had fixed this. But earlier in the main quest, when the Vault Dweller is working with the Brotherhood of Steel, Head Scribe Vree tells us that she thinks all of these mutants are indeed infertile.
All the mutants I've studied have been sterile. They can't breed with another creature. If we could clean up the mutation sources, we should be able to simply outlive the mutants.
She gives you like a little hollow disk with this data, and here at the very end of the game, we can simply say little and hand it over to the Master.
Preposterous!
The FEV2 virus doesn't destroy the reproductive organs of those it mutates. Do you have proof? One moment. Are you sure? What about the other?
Females.
It cannot be.
Yeah.
I must digest this information. One moment. I understand now. This would mean that
All my work.
has been for nothing. Don't think that I can continue
Continue?
to have done the things I have done in the name of progress and healing. It was madness. I can see that now. Madness. There is no hope. Leave now. Leave while you still have
Hope.
God damn, man. I mean, this is kind of tragic. Instead of an epic final boss fight here, the Master sees that his life's work has been for nothing. I mean, it's kind of depressing that he's so crestfallen he just says, "Can you leave?" And then shortly later, kills himself, blowing up the entire cathedral and vault with him. So often in video games, the bad guys are fun to beat. You know, you look forward to kicking their ass and celebrating their downfall. But with the Master, I feel nothing but pity and a bit of sadness. I mean, he never asked to be pushed into the FEV and be given these insane mutations that set him on the path of blood, science, and domination. Richard Gray, in many ways, can be seen as one of the biggest victims in all of this. And as his plans fell apart in front of him, all of the evil, the mutations, the scheming kind of fell away. almost as if in those final moments he was Richard again, for just a second, realizing all that he had done, what he had become, and that there was only now one solution. Ultimately, the Master is a villain that saw himself nearly the entire time as the hero of this story. All of the pain he inflicted on the Wasteland was simply a means to his end of unity and peace. But in his delusions of power, he forgot to check all of his boxes. This sterile super mutant race that he was creating was doomed to fail, and his oversight and overconfidence in his research and abilities is what sank his aspirations. I just love how this diplomacy ending here doesn't even really have you defeating the Master, but simply showing him that he failed. You are nothing but the bringer of bad news, and that is so goddamn cool and unique to me. I adore it. It's also kind of insane that a villain so smart, so powerful, and with so much muscle at his disposal ended up dead because some old busted water chip way out in Vault 13 failed. Damn. That sucks, my man. Sure, his presence in the first Fallout game here is amazing, but his lasting impact is even more impressive to me. A villain who really created an entire subrace of beings with variations cropping up over the years all across North America. Of course, various characters in the future games continue to talk about the Master, and some of them even remember him fondly as the human he once was, Richard Grey. And then there are the Nightkin and others that mention him as the Master, but overall, you feel his shadow looming large over tons of the events in the series. And now, looking back over all of the Fallout games, I mean, it's hard for me to find a main villain that is downright bad or corny. Fallout always leans heavily on the antagonists goading us down the path of adventure or revenge, whatever. But it's crazy to me that all of these years later, the Master, at least in my opinion, is still the only one that has fully lived up to the full potential of what a Fallout villain can be. I mean, he combines radiation, mutation, technology, religion, science, human nature, power, manipulation, and whatever else, all really well into one character. As I stated at the top, he is damn near perfect. And I think Fallout 1 overall is a game that more people should try out today. I mean, the gameplay, yeah, it's kind of dated, it can be tough to crack into, but the writing, the characters, the setting, and the atmosphere are so good. Seeing the original foundation of such an influential RPG series, I think, is pretty important. And at the center of it all is the crown jewel of the experience. From exiled murderer to beloved doctor, and eventually mutated supervillain, there is no denying that the Master is one of the great video game villains of all time. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this video to the very end. As always, I greatly appreciate that. Fallout is always one of those series that I forget how much I enjoy until I'm replaying one of the games, and man, did I forget how incredible the Master was until making this video. So shout out to the many of you who have been requesting this video for over a year now, and also shout out again to all of my patrons. Please let me know, everyone, other heroes, villains, and NPCs you would like to see videos on into the future. Thank you all once again, and until next time, peace.